I feel this great urgency to hold on to what we can and to learn about what's there and to have a deep relationship with the living world and to understand it in ways that we're doing as little harm as possible.
Welcome to the Vermont Conversation. I'm David Goodman. When Helen Whybrow isn't herding her flock of Icelandic sheep or in the paddock helping a ewe birth her lambs, she can be found writing. This week, this shepherd was awarded Vermont's highest literary prize. Whybrow received the 2025 Vermont Book Award for Creative Nonfiction for her memoir, The Saltstones: Seasons of a Shepherd's Life. In it, she tells the story of tending sheep on a 200-acre farm that she and her husband Peter began restoring after acquiring it a quarter-century ago. Through gorgeous and evocative prose, Whybrow weaves a tale about the rhythms of life and death on the farm and how the lessons that she has learned there have informed every aspect of her life. The time span of the book juxtaposes one season of a sheep's life with 20 years of Whybrow's life, during which she gets married, has a daughter, and cares for a mother with dementia. Helen Whybrow grew up on a small farm in Plainfield, New Hampshire, the daughter of a physician and a social worker. She left home to attend Amherst College, travel the world, and landed back in New England to pursue a career as an editor for W. W. Norton, Orion, and Milkweed Editions, the nonprofit independent press that published The Saltstones. She and her husband Peter Forbes run Knoll Farm in Fayston, an organic farm and home to purebred Icelandic sheep, and also a retreat center for social and environmental justice. The Vermont Book Award is just the latest critical acclaim for The Saltstones. It has been longlisted for the National Book Award, named a New Yorker Best Book of the Year, and been featured on NPR's Fresh Air. I met Helen Whybrow at Knoll Farm on a warm spring afternoon. The sounds of sheep bleating formed a backdrop to our conversation. We stood on the hillside overlooking the Mad River Valley, and I asked Helen to describe the landscape around us.
Thank you, David. We are standing kind of at the center of the farmstead. We're overlooking the Northfield Range, and wrapped around behind us is the Green Mountains, a couple of ski areas that we can see from here. But we're standing near this beautiful big old barn that was moved up here onto this steep hillside in 1923 when this was a prosperous dairy in the Mad River Valley. We now use it for our retreat center for gathering activists from all over the country. But more importantly to my book, we're looking out on a series of sheep paddocks where they spend the winter and where they have their lambs, and then a landscape of open fields where I move them every couple of days in the summer. And then behind us, as the fields stretch around behind, we have our blueberry orchard. We grow pick-your-own organic blueberries. And then up into the forest where we have a sugar bush, and the forest kind of is the beginning of a big stretch of wild woodland that goes all the way to Camel's Hump.
Tell me a little bit about the history of Knoll Farm, which you describe in your book so beautifully, and you are now the stewards for this moment in time.
Yes, thank you. So Knoll Farm has been settled since 1804. When the land was cleared, presumably for sheep and for logging, although we do have records from an old journal that they also grew wheat here and potatoes. But it was always a subsistence farm. Like many of these hill farms, it was really meant just to feed a family. And it wasn't until the late 1800s that it became a more prosperous dairy farm. And they were making butter and sending it to Boston. There's a little tiny milk house that was set by the road that had a spring bubbling up in it where they would put the cans of milk to cool, and a horse and buggy would come by and pick them up, and they'd go down to the valley, and there was a creamery down there. And then this was a very isolated place, like a lot of these little Vermont villages. So getting that butter to Boston must have been a real trick. Probably it went to Waterbury and then on the train. But the history of these hill farms is really a history of struggle. And this farm was abandoned right around the Great Depression. It went through a series of different owners, including the Ward Timber Company, who cut over the land, high grading the timber. And then it became an inn. And it was purchased in the 1950s by a couple who moved up from Concord, Mass, named Anne and Frank Day. And they started a ski school here before Sugarbush or Mad River Glen opened. They had a rope tow on this very steep hill that is now our sheep pasture, and they taught night skiing, and they ran an inn in the old farmhouse, and they kept some cattle and some horses, and they did that for 45 years or so until Anne was in her 80s or maybe late 70s. She conserved the property with what was then the Ottaquiche Land Trust, and then in an extraordinary offer of generosity actually gave the whole farm to the Vermont Land Trust in 1998 with the understanding that they would find new stewards to keep it in agriculture, keep it as a place of education and experience for people who might want access to a farm. Anne was someone who led all kinds of kind of public service, did a lot of public service work here over the years, including harboring Nicaraguan and Guatemalan refugees during the Civil War in Central America. All kinds of incredible work that she did here through the American Friends Service Committee. So we, through a very long process and a very strange real estate transaction, basically came here because our essay won the contest, so to speak, and we were chosen to buy the property from the Vermont Land Trust and run our own educational programs here and start a farm. So we brought sheep here and started the blueberries in 2001. And at that time, we also started a nonprofit, which is still running today, and that does all of the social justice work that people can read much more about on our website than they can in my book, because it was far too big of a topic for me to describe adequately, along with describing my practice of pastoralism and my connection to nature.
In a nutshell, what does this center do, the nonprofit that operates here?
It provides a really important and meaningful space for hard conversations to happen, and for people who are working on the front lines of social justice or environmental justice or land return or any number of issues to come together and rejuvenate, cross-pollinate with like-minded individuals, get some rest, get some support. And so we have almost 3,000 alumni now from all over the country who are doing incredibly important work, and lots of ideas around justice and organizing have sort of been born here. It's a little bit like a Highlander Center, like the Highlander Center was for civil rights, like really just a place where things can get organized and can be nurtured.
Before we chat further, can you introduce me to your lambs, your sheep?
Yes, I think you can probably hear them in the distance.
Can we walk over and you can tell me a little bit about a few of the characters. Who are we meeting here, and why are these lambs in their own paddock?
So they're all sort of connected right now. They're getting used to, their bellies are getting used to the grass, having been on hay all winter. So they're starting to kind of introduce all that new microflora. And so I've opened the paddock so they can go get some grass, but they can easily come back into the shade and get some hay and get some water. This one right here, these are her twins that are she's standing guard over them, which is often what they do when the lambs are young. And she's probably just hot and wanting to be in the shade.
What's her name?
Day for them. Her name is Total because she was born during the total eclipse. And she was one of 4. And they all made it, but the mother did not make it. So I had all these black total eclipse bottle babies for that summer, which was really fun. And I kept her.
And her babies, there's one that's ink black and the other that is Snow White.
Yes, we named them Flannery for Flannery O'Connor.
Okay.
And Shelley for Mary Shelley. We're naming them after writers this year. We pick a different theme each year. Okay. So we also have a Maya Angelou out there and a Joan Didion. I think we have a Wendell Berry. Somebody voted for Wendell Berry, so that was good.
We wandered from the paddock over to the farmhouse where Helen Whybrow and her husband live, and I asked her to read a passage from the Saltstones that describes this time of year.
Okay, well, here's a chapter that's about this time of year. It's really April, but it talks about bringing the sheep out from the winter paddocks onto the green fields. It's early April, and the frozen heart of the land is slow to let go. The frost rises and cracks the ground, letting in rivulets of rain to penetrate and loosen the cold. And in the morning, my boots crunch across infinite worlds of ice crystals and miniature prisms. On the south-facing fields where the snow is melted, the first shoots soften the hard, dead plains of the hill with the slightest mist of gray-green. The sheep paddocks outside the sheds where the ewes birth their lambs stink of manure steeped in rain, of rotting hay and bare earth beginning to waken. 2 robins who have just returned from the south peck at patches of mud between giant blocks of snow and ice that have fallen from the barn roof, white wing patches flashing with each hop. These are the early scouts. Soon the fields will be full of robins, and we'll hear their beautiful full-throated music from the tops of the maples. This morning is quiet and cold, without birdsong, or the chirr of insects, or a tentative call of the first frog, but I sense that the long sensory deprivation chamber of winter in the north is about to break. Around here, the sheep are the first to mark the season of voices rising. Grass cannot grow quickly enough for a ewe flock in spring. My sheep sniff the metallic blood smell of earth thawing and grass growing and baa loudly in their hunger. The ewes who have birthed are already rangy, transformed from wide-beamed and expecting to leggy creatures whose lambs suck milk from their udders and flesh from their bones. They eat a few mouthfuls of last summer's now dingy hay and pace the perimeter of the winter paddock with their lambs close behind, crying at the fence lines as they beg me to let them wander and kick up their heels for the first blades of green. And I, having learned a shepherd's mind of pacing for the season, cruelly refuse to open the gates. I stuff some more brittle hay into the feeders, and they look at me with defiance, getting down on their knees to snuffle tiny morsels of the neon green stuff through woven fence wires. And after that, I talk about what it means to be a grass farmer and a pastoralist, where you raise animals just on grass and not on grain or anything else.
Could you read the section you wrote about belonging? It's just a couple paragraphs.
Yes. This is in the chapter called Initiation, which is the only chapter where I really kind of step back and do a little bit more memoir. The sheep, it turns out, were what I needed to help me immerse in a new place. Along with the land itself, they have been my touchstone and my teachers. Sheep have helped me become a good shepherd, not just to them, but to a place that is my sustenance and joy, as well as my unending labor and worry. The idea of belonging, what it is, what enables it to happen or not happen, where and how it is found, has preoccupied me most of my life. My practice of being a shepherd is a huge part of my ongoing inquiry into belonging, not just my own, but understanding what it means for all of us in this time of profound loss of the natural world. This deep encounter with land, this process of falling in love with a place, was something I knew in my bones, something that seemed fated for me. And at Knoll Farm, I arrived with my begging bowl of perception empty, with room for what I experienced to nourish me in new and surprising ways.
Say more about what you mean by belonging and how being a shepherd informs that.
Belonging to me is a word that we use a lot, right? And we all kind of understand what it means. We all have this human need to belong to something or to someone. But for me, it also encompasses this word longing. And even when one feels belonging, there's often a sense of longing for elsewhere or longing for something unrequited. And I think it's like it is actually part of belonging, that feeling. And I've experienced a lot of that in my life, either homesickness when I wasn't at the farm when I grew up, or when I was at the farm feeling like it was kind of a place that trapped me, as always having to milk the cows and not being able to just leave. And so I've wrestled all my life with this kind of tension between wanting to be a nomad and wanting to deeply root in a place. And what I've kind of come to understand here at Knoll Farm is that the more you participate in your place and your life, the deeper your sense of belonging becomes. It's not something you just step into that was ready-made and you have to keep searching until you find it. It's like something that you actually create by doing it on your own.
Say more about where you grew up and how that led you to this place. Your family were kind of reluctant farmers, as I understand it.
My parents were not reluctant farmers by any means, but they were very busy people, and they're both English. They came to the U.S. when my sister and I were toddlers, and they'd grown up in farming country, very working class in England. They loved farming, but my father was a young doctor. My mother was a social worker, and although we lived in a farming community, they were professional people. My sister and I went to school with, probably 80% of the kids in our classes were farmers back then in the 70s. So we wanted a farm. So we said to our parents, we begged and begged them to get cows and horses and chickens. And they finally relented and they said, you can get whatever animals you want as long as we never have to go to the barn. So my sister and I grew up. And not that they didn't want to go, it was that they were afraid to take on that responsibility. So my sister and I did 100% of the animal care. We ended up with about 10 dairy cows. We showed them at 4-H in the summers. And it was our chosen way of life, I would say, until we went to college.
Farming, and you describe this, is both a foundation of security, of regularity, of routines, and it can also be a burden. You can't leave. And how did your growing up with that enable you to leave? And explain the connection.
Well, I was privileged to have the opportunity to go to college and to have the opportunity to choose being a farmer or not. It wasn't like I had inherited the family dairy farm that had been going for generations and I just needed to keep it going. And I think a lot about farmers who are in that situation, or farm families that have a lot of debt, where the burden of responsibility and of staying put is far, far beyond anything that I've ever experienced in my life. But I do think that it's a blessing and a curse. I think there's also something incredibly beautiful and rich about staying in one place. And like Richard Nelson says in one of my favorite books, The Island Within, he wrote, "There's more to be learned from climbing the same mountain 1,000 times than 1,000 different mountains." And I really believe that.
You enter farming in your life at a time when farming is in steep decline and farmers are being pushed out of farming even when they want to stay. You see this around you in your own home, the Mad River Valley, how mightily the farmers here who have been doing it for generations struggle. So you're seeing a house falling down or even burning down, and you rush towards it. Explain the allure.
Yeah, as a child, I grew up surrounded by dairy farmers who were being paid to slaughter their herds in the 1970s because of the milk surplus, and a lot of them never recovered, and cows never went back in those barns. And it was tragic. I remember as a child, like my heart just breaking for people. And yet there was such a vibrant community around farming that my sister and I loved being part of. And we spent all summer long going to these fairs with other farm kids and showing our dairy cows. And so at farming, the hard work and the physical aspect and the animal aspect of farming I always loved. But I think coming to Knoll Farm, and I think most young farmers today are aware that it's very, very perilous, actually, not just difficult, but kind of perilous to try to start a commercially viable farm on a small scale, and that you have to do other things. And Peter and I both worked other jobs when we came here, and since we started running our nonprofit, we do like so many layers of different things at Knoll Farm, and it's partly because we have big aspirations to do a lot of things with our lives, but it's also because it's the only way we've been able to make it work and pay the taxes, is just layer all these things on top of each other. And the farm is certainly profitable, but it would not be alone the only thing we could do. That said, to me, there's like, farming is small scale diversified farming in Vermont is actually one of the bright spots now. And compared to when I was a child, there are so many more small farms and farmers markets and people buying local food and co-ops selling local food. And the infrastructure of butchers and small fiber mills and all that stuff did not exist at all when I was a child. So farming has not necessarily died out. It's just really changed.
You end your book by writing, "You don't have to become a sheep farmer to cultivate a shepherd's mind, which is about finding a way to listen, to tend, and to immerse in the living world. Sheep may be one way. Most importantly, may you find your own." Talk about the shepherd's mind and how you carry it into everything you do.
Thank you for that question. I think my book it's about farming, it's about pastoralism and shepherding, but I think most of all, it's about the relationship with nature and how we are living at a time when we are surrounded by the diminishment of the natural world. And I feel this great urgency to hold on to what we can and to learn about what's there and to have a deep relationship with the living world and to understand it in ways that we're doing as little harm as possible. And even to, have that reciprocity with nature that is mutually flourishing, which Robin Kimmerer writes a lot about. I think a shepherd's mind is, for me, it's a phrase I came up with when I was writing the book that just kept kind of coming to me, that was really about how I look at things when I walk across the land following the animals, and I'm watching what they're doing, and I'm watching and I'm understanding all the things around me that are all part of one whole and that are all interacting. And so I think shepherd's mind for me is it's kind of a complex meditation move, right? It's like contemplative, but there's something about absorbing the complexity of things.
What do sheep teach you?
Oh my gosh, so much. I mean, so much about mothering and nurturing and attention and how to see the landscape and what grows here and what happens in what season, and they've just been great companions. I mean, there's nothing like sitting in a field with a bunch of sheep lying around you chewing their cuds and lambs running around. I mean, it's just like definitely healing, a healing moment when I get to do that.
What if people were paying attention to the natural landscape, to sheep in a pasture, what might they learn?
That's a really good question. I don't know. I think sheep have co-evolved with grass for thousands of years. So they have a very complex microflora and a complex digestive system. And we, of course, domesticated these animals 14,000 years ago because we can't digest grass. Or at least we can't make protein from it. We can't completely digest it, and they can. And so we have a relationship with grasslands through these animals. Most pastoralists are not raising meat. They're following their animals to have milk and occasional meat, but to basically have nourishment, more nourishment than they could get otherwise. And it's really fascinating to me how we've evolved with these ruminant animals by domesticating them so long ago. I mean, we were pastoralists before we were farmers. So we have also co-evolved. And I think we're just living in a time where we've lost a lot of this ancient knowledge, this traditional and ancient knowledge that we call it ancient now, but it only started disappearing about 100 years ago. And so it's something I think we can easily reclaim, because I really think it's actually part of us.
Your book happens along two parallel time frames. One is a single season in a sheep's life, and the other is a period of many years, and one of the other small beings who grows up is your daughter, Wren. We meet her when your husband, Peter, is cutting her cord, and at the end of the book, she's a young woman about to embark on a cross-country bicycle journey, which causes you great distress as you contemplate the things that could go wrong. What will Knoll Farm be in Wren's life?
I think Knoll Farm is just so much a part of Wren, and always will be. I mean, she was born here in the house, and my book covers a span of 20 years. We've been here about 25 years. I have a little poem in there that Wren wrote when she was 6 or 7, or something about the grass is my thinker, which is a line she wrote, which I love. And she was a very, very much of a free range kid. And I think she just absorbed this place. She just swallowed it whole. And I think her incredible adventurous spirit in the world and her fearlessness comes from that like ability to just find her way on this hillside. So I think, no matter where she is, she'll be well served by having grown up this way, like a lot of Vermont kids do.
I wonder, as you describe both the blessing and the burden of growing up on a farm, a place where you have just an incredible sense of place and grounding. Will it be more blessing or burden for her as it has been something that you've had to navigate?
Yeah, again, I think she'll be lucky in a way in that she can make choices in her life, and that we won't be handing her the key to the tractor and saying it's all yours, baby. Good luck. I mean, I think we have other plans for the farm than to just pass it on, but who knows? Maybe she'll start her own small farm and do something really cool. I mean, I'm so proud of the young people who are doing that despite all the hurdles that are present. So she might be one of them in a few years. She's studying natural science at UVM right now.
One of the things that happen in the season of a shepherd's life includes caring for your mother, who is declining and has dementia. Talk about that experience of going from this place in Vermont, full of life, full of young people who are interns, and to seeing her decline back in New Hampshire.
Yeah, so always hard, right? And an experience so many people have of having a parent who you kind of lose by degrees and you say goodbye to over a very long period of time. And I think for me, my mom and I were always very, very close. The saddest thing was not being able to just talk to her on the phone. She got her dementia kind of started to get more pronounced during COVID. And so I couldn't go and see her. And I also couldn't really talk to her on the phone because she stopped really being able to use the phone. And it was a very, very difficult thing. There's no other way to describe it. And I think that what got me through it was the physical, when I could see her again, like the physical touch and the ability to interact with her with our eyes and our expressions and our touch, and words not really having to make any sense. Words were not part of the picture. I missed that because we had always had these just profound, amazing conversations. She was a very wise, insightful person and a very present person. But her presence stayed, that part of her spirit stayed. And I think that's what it's all about. It's just like seeing that part of the person that's still there, and you just work with that.
How did being a shepherd enable you to be her shepherd in those final years?
Well, I don't know that I was, but I definitely felt it made me more comfortable with loss. When you're a sheep farmer, you lose a lot of animals. There's a lot of death. And it's devastating at first when you're starting out. And then it's not like you become immune to it, but you start to see it as just part of the cycle and part of the seasonal turn of, things are born and things die and accidents happen. And the compost is made partly from the bones of the animals. And I think there was something about having gone through that for so many years that helped me let go of my mom and realize she's still there. She's kind of everywhere. I talk to her all the time.
What does she tell you?
She's just, she's such a bright spirit. I mean, she was always a glass half full, glass overflowing person. So that's what she tells me. Keep your glass overflowing.
We're sitting in this farm. There is a beautiful red-stained barn, a very familiar sight in Vermont that once upon a time, I gather, was a dairy barn and a working dairy, part of a working dairy operation. And, it strikes me that the farmers who were here 100 years ago never in their wildest dreams could imagine what it is under your and Peter's stewardship. You have transformed this in a way that makes total sense for you and gives it life and relevance now in the 21st century. What is the future of this place? What do you imagine the next stewards of Knoll Farm might do? Or perhaps you are having a hand in writing that script.
I really don't know, which I think is one of the most beautiful things about it. I think that we certainly hope that it will always be a farm and it'll always be growing food and producing a place for people to find refuge and healing. And I don't have any expectations about it being a certain type of place. I just really hope that it hangs on to the ecological health that it has. And I don't want it to become like a second home or somewhere that doesn't have relevance to whatever struggles people and nature are going through at the time. Like that, I just hope that it stays with its finger on that pulse of nature and the pulse of people who need refuge.
What's next for you?
I don't even really dare to say this, but I am experimenting with fiction. I've never written fiction, but it's really calling to me right now to write some fiction. I'm about to go to speak at my father's celebration of life. So I've been writing also about him and about his writing and about sort of what he gave me and taught me about writing. So I'm just sort of playing around with words. That's what's next for me.
And finally, what do you hope that people will come away from the Saltstones with?
I hope it's a book that people read and feel like this was written for me. I can see myself in parts of this, even if I don't live on a farm. I don't know anything about sheep, but there's something here that makes me feel like life is good and okay, and I can be part of that health and healing. And it's just, I've wanted it to be like a remedy for people, to bring them closer to nature and to themselves in nature.
Well, Helen Whybrow, thank you for joining us on the Vermont Conversation.
Thank you so much, David. It's a pleasure.
Helen Whybrow is the author of The Saltstones, Seasons of a Shepherd's Life, winner of the 2025 Vermont Book Award. She manages Knoll Farm, a 200-acre organic farm in Fayston. That does it for this week's Vermont Conversation. I'm David Goodman. Thanks so much for listening.